we are getting there. Let's go. I want to show you now an example of a class object, but before I do, I want to use a constructor function. And I know I've been doing that a lot, but I just want to have a very simple one, just so you can compare the differences between the two. This is all about classes. And let's do example 1, where we use a constructor function. And remember, the first step to a constructor function is to define your object. And let's just do a person, which gets passed in a name, and we set the new object's name to the name that we've passed in. So person's name will be the name we've passed in. But now let's say on this object, this constructor function, we're wanting to include a greeting method that can greet the user by their name. Now, one of the problems we saw, and we saw it in the previous lecture, is that if we use the constructor function and put the method inside its body, inside its block like this, if we go this, and let's call it greeting equals function blah blah blah. If we put it in there, we saw that every time you create a new instance of this greeting method is being stored in that new variable. And that's just a memory leak. It's just a waste of space. It slows your system down. So what we saw was we can access the person, and on the prototype, we can include a method called greeting. And let's do this now. And all this greeting must do is just console log this name. And what's the second step with a constructor function? That's right, we need to instantiate. We need to call the object. So let's go let user equals new person, and let's say his name is Wally. And because we've set the greeting method on the prototype, we can access this directly right now. For example, user greeting, and it console logs Wally. This is intuitive and you understand this. So now let's create the same object with the class syntax. Now, before I actually go into class syntax, can you see my IDE has already put 3 dots below that P, below my function constructor? Can you see that? And if I hover over it, it says this constructor function may be converted to a class declaration. So it's actually saying to me, hey, we can convert our constructor function into a more up-to-date class syntax way of declaring this object. But anyway, I'll leave that there for now so you can compare the differences. You'll see how similar they are. So with the constructor function, the first step was to, that's right, define your object. And we use that by using the function keyword. Well, with the class syntax, we don't use a function keyword, we use a, what keyword? Drumroll. We use the class keyword. So class person. And then we follow it by open and closing curly braces. So you can see we've just created a class object. But now the only difference is that with a constructor function, we could pass that name variable within it. Or with a class object, we have to define a constructor function. And it's simple and it's intuitive. You call it the constructor, and the constructor is going to take in a name variable. And we're going to set the new variable's name to the name we pass into this constructor function. Whew, so there you have it. That's the first part that we've replicated on that constructor function. And you can see how similar in syntax it is. All we've done though differently is that we've defined a constructor method within this class, within this object. The other thing now that we want to do is we want to add that greeting method, remember? Well, when we use the constructor function, we had to explicitly put it onto the prototype of it. But with a class, any method you actually declare in it is automatically put on the prototype. So it actually helps us automatically allocate methods in the most optimal way. You don't need commas or anything to separate these out. You can just keep going. So here we're going to define a greeting function. And all we want to do is console log the name, right? And there you have it. We've created a class that results in the same object than what we just did above with the constructor function. Let me comment this out and then I'll show you. I just don't want conflicting variable names. And let's look at an example. And what's awesome about this is that we still have to go through the same processes with a class than we did with a constructor function. Remember, step 1 was to define your object. We've done that now. What's step 2? That's right, we've got to call our object. So let user equal new person. And now we're going to put in the name Wally. And it's very similar to what we've been seeing previously. Now this greeting method, if we go user greeting, it console logs Wally to the screen. How cool is this? But we're not quite done. I just want to show you 3 things very quickly. You know how I keep telling you how the class syntax is so similar to a construction function? Well, a constructor function is a function. So you'd expect this class that we've created to also be a function. Right? Let me prove it to you. So let me say here, in JavaScript, a class is a kind of function. And it puts the methods we create here into the prototype property. Let me prove this to you. Let's console log the type of person. And there you have it. It is a function. But what function is it? I would expect it to be the constructor function. Remember, for the constructor function, if you console log the function out, it would actually throw you back the constructor function. So I'd expect the same here, and I can prove that to you as well. So let's console log the person, class person, which we've just created, and we know that's a function. And let's test this by saying, is that equal to the person, the prototype, and the constructor on that prototype? And the result is true. So you can see that these things are just exactly the same. And the final thing I want to prove to you is that, can you see my second statement on there? It says, using the class, puts the methods we create into the prototype property. So how many methods should we have on the prototype property of this person class? Well, I'd expect 2. One called constructor and one called greeting. And the cool thing with JavaScript is we've got inbuilt methods on the global object that allow us to access and test what properties we have. So let's console log, let's access the global object. And there is a property or a method called getPropertyNames. That's what we want. We want to see all our property names on our person object, but the prototype of it. And you can see there we've got 2, constructor and greeting. Whew! This is cool. This is really getting advanced. I hope you're starting to get a feel for these things. I mean, just take a step back. We've done a lot. We've created objects via the literal syntax, constructor functions, object.create, and now we've just done it via the class method. And don't worry if you've been a bit confused with this last section now. We're going to get into prototypes in the next section. I'm going to have a whole bonus on it. But just take a step back and realize, like, there are so many different ways in JavaScript to create objects. And we can play around with these things all day long. But the truth is, you must just get comfortable with what you enjoy the most. And in some situations, you're going to prefer one over the other. So let's continue. Let's have fun. Go get a coffee. Go get a Coke. Whatever pumps you up. Maybe not a whiskey. You need a good mind for these things. And let's continue. I'll see you in the next lecture.